This is Tessa Keogh, and I received an email from Thora who had a couple of questions. First of all, about some problems she was having preparing for a research trip that she's taking in a few days. Thora is lucky enough to be going to Salt Lake City, and she was working with her legacy file and was just a bit confused or concerned about how to put together some reports for her research. Now, the difficulty that I had was that Thora and I were communicating through emails, and I don't know if that's because she just recently joined Google Plus and she's a little bit unfamiliar with how to work with it, or if there's some other reason. But I was happy that she went ahead and contacted me by clicking on my email and sending me the first email. We went back and forth, and hopefully I'll be able to connect with her. But in the meantime, I took a look at what a couple of her questions were and thought I'd try to answer them by showing her what I do in my legacy program. Now, keep in mind that this is one way of doing it, and it might not even be the best way of doing it. And I would love it if some of you would chime in and tell me if there's a different way you do it or what you'd add to it. And hopefully we can make Thora's research experience in Salt Lake easier and more efficient. Thora's actual question was that some of her issues relate to the best way to add events, and the example that she gave me was census records with all the source citations. And she was trying to figure out if that was building a timeline for her people, and she wanted to know why her reports were coming out. She told me she thought she was exaggerating, but at about 500 pages, because she knows she doesn't have that many ancestors, and that she was mostly interested in people born before, say, 1940 as an example. Now, the first questions that I had back for Thora, since we were going back and forth in an email as opposed to a Google Hangout, was what exactly is she trying to do? What's the purpose of her research trip in Salt Lake City? Basically what's she going to be focusing on? I don't know how long she's going to be there or how many people she's researching. I also don't know the areas that she's researching in, or the time frame that she wants to research. And then finally, how is she doing her research? Specifically, what's she going to Salt Lake for that might be different than looking at Ancestry.com or FamilySearch.org, or anything else where she might be finding census records. So I was basically trying to figure out what she going to Salt Lake City to look for. What's there that's so particular that she can't get online? And don't get me wrong, online is the tip of the iceberg, so there's plenty in Salt Lake City. I just wanted to make sure that she wasn't using her Salt Lake trip to do research that she could do at home. But if what she wants to do there is work with censuses, that's perfectly all right too. And I would even mention that when I first went to Salt Lake City, I was able to find information about state censuses that I certainly didn't get online, and I was able to get a lot of information from books, certainly local histories and that type of thing, that you also can't get online. And that kind of filled in, especially with Nebraska censuses, filled in different time frames for me, between the say like the 1880 and the 1900 census or that type of thing. So it gave you a little bit more idea of where to find people. You can also get some real interesting property records there. But in any event, if what she's working on is the U.S. Census, I'm just going to show you a few things that I do in my own program to do some searches. And hopefully this will cut down on her having 500 pages in a report with Legacy. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, I've opened my program, as you can see, and this is my Keogh Lidman family. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Search tab, and I click on Find, and it opens here, because this is the last place I was at, to the census list. But there's any number of searches that you can do, and I would suggest that if you're interested in doing a census list for your research, you might want to come here first. And what I've done is I've just filled out that it's in the United States, although be aware that they have censuses in other places. And I tend to do my places by county because I find that easier for working with a smaller group of people. But if you are looking for people that are all in the state of Washington or the state of Nebraska, then you would just want to go ahead and take that section out and make it, that's what I'm going to do because that's how mine is done, Washington and the United States. Now you can also select a census year, and that's right here. And since we're dealing with the United States, you'll notice that they give you all the census years. If you wanted to type in your own date, you could do that as well. You can take a look at the report options that you want, and I always include the married names for wives because what you're going to find maybe in the 1940 census is somebody that was single in 1930 is of course married in 1940, and you're not going to find them under their maiden name there. I include alternate names. I have a number of immigrants and they changed their name when they came to the United States, perhaps, but sometimes those names went back and forth. And sometimes if you've put in an alternate name from earlier census years, and that's a really good tip, maybe they didn't go by Thomas, maybe they went by Tom. Maybe their name was Thomas, but they went by their middle name, which was Andrew. You want to give yourself all of those possibilities when you're doing the search. And if you have that in your report, you can just go through all of those names without having to go back and forth and look in your program. Now, if I've already found them in the census, and I did that originally for some very close family members, I want that excluded from this report because I don't want to worry about doing that same research over again. I do use calculated dates, and I like to have some space. So that's what I've put in, but you select whatever options you want here. And I put in I don't exclude individuals, but you can type that in and put in percentages if you want. Now you can also go to your list options, and this is exactly where it shows up here again, that you're excluding individuals. So once you've decided on the things that you want and you've set up your page or your fonts for your report, go ahead and create that search list or preview a census list report. And realize that when you do that, it's not printing out anything yet. So this is a good way to take a look and see, this is not getting me what I want. This is not what I was looking for. I'm getting too much or too little information. So let's take a look and see what we get when we ask it to create a list of individuals who would have been on the federal census in the state of Washington in 1940. Now it's happily taking a look at my file and building my report, and boom, here it comes up. It's at 100%. I'm going to make it a little larger so hopefully you can see it. But in any event, it lists everyone in alphabetical order by their last name. It also lists their married names and if they had a few marriages or if they went by a different name. And in this regard, he always was called Kelly. I was surprised when I found out his actual name was Carl Herman. The great thing about this report is it gives you because I've asked for it, it gives me the birth date and the death date. It gives me their age, which kind of helps you look when you have a real common name. And it tells you where you might be looking in the state of Washington. Now, for my purposes, I'll tell you that this is 21 pages long. So that's too long for me, frankly. And I would go back here and I would put in King County. And I'll show you why I do that. As it's quickly building my report for me again. Right away that drops that down to 15, and the other great thing about this is I can print up my report and know that I'm dealing strictly with King County, and that's what I'm interested in. I want to focus on a particular area and go through the census, and then I might want to move on to another area like Multnomah County, Oregon, or Wright County, Minnesota, or Fairfax County, Virginia. I like to work on those reports whether I do them locally or someplace like Salt Lake City, all in one place. I want to look at those individual states or individual counties and group them. And I think this works really well because a lot of times you're going to find, especially if your ancestors were anything like mine, they all kind of lived close to each other. If they were in the farming community, they they lived together in a particular area. If they were in the city, they tended to live in the same general vicinity. And so I think this makes your census searching much easier as well. But that's a way to get your census report. Now, another thing you can do is come over here to the detailed search. And in the first instance, I'm asking it to look for individuals, but realize that you can ask for marriages, you can limit it by their sex. You add the individual, you add a birth date. And here she said she wanted individuals that were born before 1940. And so that's what I ask it for. All of these drop-down menus give you the chance to change any of this information, but we want birth date. And I don't want it equal to 1940, I want it before 1940. So definitely make sure when you're putting together your search that you kind of think through how it all adds up. So the first thing is we're going to ask Legacy to give us individuals born before 1940. So if I create a list, it gives me 5,522 individuals, and that includes the married name. And as I look through this, I'm going to find that some of these people are in the United States, and you'll see this individual actually I've already found the census for, but other individuals are still up in Canada at this point, and so they wouldn't be somebody who I was interested in for the census. So I close that. I'm sure there's easier ways. I go and I add a second condition, and I say and because I want them born before 1940 and I want an individual with an event name of a census. So it needs to contain census because I believe she's telling me she's looking for the census here. So we add that in. And then always make sure you clear the list before you do the search. You could also ask it to add results to an existing list. But we create the list here, and immediately this drops down to 1,142 names. But the thing is, what you're going to be getting is events that have census in them. So you'll see this individual has 3 censuses, but it's the 1920, the 1930, and the 1940 census. But the reason that it's in here is because I've only asked for censuses. So I can open my census bar, and you saw how I did that again right in the search. And I can say that I have a third condition, which is an and, not an or, because I want it to contain census and something else. So that individual with a birth date before 1940, an event name that contains census, I also want that event date to contain 1910. And let's see what happens. This drops down my list to 367 names, including married names. So now what I'm getting, if you take a look here, is a census in 1910. So this is an example of where I have the source citations. So I've found the individual in the 1910 census. Now, the difficulty that Thora is going to have is if she uses a detailed search and she's looking for census and she wants to pick a particular year, this is going to give her results based on what she's already entered. So if she's looking for people that she needs to find censuses for, Thora needs to use the census example search. If she's looking for people that she's found a census for, but maybe she hasn't found the source citation, or she hasn't made a copy of the census, or she hasn't transcribed the census, so what she's trying to do is find that census again, then she's going to want to go ahead and do the detailed search. But since I'm not quite sure what Thora is trying to do to get her events in order, I thought I would give you both examples. Now I also want to show you that just in this example, if we were to take a look and edit it, I've listed the census date and I use the date that the enumeration starts. I don't pick and choose the various dates that the people were individually enumerated on. I always list the lines, the dwelling, and the family numbers. Then I list household members. I number all of them and leave the two spaces because for my purposes we have family members or families that go beyond 10. And then I gather the information from the census that I want to have in there. And so this shows you that I've finished entering my information. And then if we were to click on my source citation, this will bring up the 1910 census. And as you can see, I have all my censuses, all my master sources listed together. So these are all censuses, all the USA censuses, and then it lists them by year. So if we were to go into 1910, I'll show you how I do my information at this point, my data entry. I use the source writer, so I take the information from, in this instance, I think that I was using a family history number. And I said I accessed it through Ancestry and the date that I accessed it. So this was back in 2011. And so I grab all of that information, my source citation, and I just fill it in for the census. But the one thing that I do that's a little bit different than some other people is I just list the 1910 census. My detail or my source detail is the particular jurisdiction information. And so I've listed the city or the town, the county, and the state. Now right here it says jurisdiction city. But I'm not concerned with what Legacy wants. I'm concerned with what I want. And this works the best for me because I'm a lumper, not a splitter when it comes to things like censuses. So I've listed the jurisdiction that I want. I've included the role and the enumeration district, and this will show up in the information from wherever you have looked at the actual census. Then I also put in the page and the image number and the film that it comes from. I include their dwelling number, and something that many people aren't aware of is you have to scroll all the way through this source detail so that you can add the family number. And then I give the household, Brian Shaughnessy household, and the date I accessed it. I really haven't used the surety levels because I haven't found them that helpful at this point. If I have, a birth certificate right in front of me or something like that, I'll put that in as a higher level. But for the most part, I've left surety level alone. And then I put the date that I recorded. In the text area, I put that in my event, so I don't have it in that source area. And I haven't really taken advantage or used the attaching images to my legacy program at this point, so that's just not in there. So that gives you an idea of what this looks like. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, so hopefully that you can see that I have in the master source information cited the 1910 U.S. Census. It's the population schedule. This will bring in this information, as you can see right here, right into the site. And it will show you that I was looking at a digital image from Ancestry, and then this is the subsequent citation and the bibliography information. And this works for me. It's very close, I think, to Evidence Explained. I can find this information. That's my point, and I think that's how you should approach it. Do what works for you. So, I hope that this helped you and gave you a little bit of an idea on searching. I'm not 100% sure what your questions were, Thora, so if you want to get back to me here at the Legacy Virtual Users Group community and tell me if you have additional questions or if you were going off in a different direction, that would be wonderful, and then certainly we'll try to help you with that. But I guess I would say one more time that it's really helpful if you're going to go on a research trip to focus on particular areas and focus on, I think, particular record sets that you want to do your research. I think sometimes when you go someplace like a large facility, perhaps the Minnesota Archives or Salt Lake City, I think sometimes you can get very overwhelmed, especially if you bring everything with you. And I think if you've taken a look at the catalog first and you know the kinds of things that you want to research, I think that's a really good start. And I think it's also a good start to focus again on things you can get in Salt Lake City that you can't get online and you can't get from online resources other than the FamilySearch.org website, so that you're spending your time with those resources that are unavailable online. The other thing I would encourage you to do is meet up with the consultants that are at the Family History Center. I have had extraordinary luck when I did my Swedish, Norwegian, and Irish research there, in that they were very helpful, answered questions, kind of gave you advice, did some translations for me even when I found a record, and I could pick out certain things, but I couldn't pick out others. And they're at the various desks when you are in the Scandinavian section or the Irish or British record section. The only piece of advice I'd give you is know what your question is. Don't tell them some big long story about your ancestors, because there's a lot of people there who also want to ask questions. So if you have a document, make sure that you've made a photocopy of it, or make sure that you have it on your tablet so they can look at it. If you have some specific questions about where to look for something, make sure you have names, make sure you have time frames, dates that they need to look for, places you should find them, because they're very helpful, but you don't want them to be trying to find a needle in a haystack. You want them to be able to focus like a laser on what your question is, and I tell you, they will open all kinds of research doors for you. So, Thora, if you have any more questions, you have my email. And if you're here in the Legacy Virtual Users Group community, feel free to post a comment right down here and tell us what you're looking for if what I was doing doesn't answer your question. And hopefully this will answer some questions for other people who might be thinking, how do I do my census research, or how do I find my census entries that maybe I didn't do all my source citations for? And trust me, I've been guilty of that, so no worries. We're all going to work on cleaning up our legacy databases. So, best of luck with your research, and keep those questions coming.